Pacing is something you often hear about when you look up a movie and you read a critical review. Critics will often say the pacing was incredibly slow, it was hard to follow, but what does this actually mean? So, after looking online through different definitions of what pacing actually is, some define it as the editing of a film, how quickly a film flows. A lot of people will say if you don't notice a film's editing or if you don't think about a film's pace, then the film was pretty well paced. Other people will argue that it's the writing, the way the movie was written. If there's too many scenes where nothing is really happening, then it's gonna cause the film to drag. It's gonna be difficult to stick with it. Some people have argued that society's attention spans are getting worse. So a film that is paced too slowly can feel exhausting. A film paced too quickly loses its power. It leads to a weaker climax, and it loses the ability to use tension. Films paced too quickly are your average comic book movies. Think about the Avengers films. A lot of people love these movies, but at the end of the day, these films are one fistfight to another fistfight to another fistfight to a final battle. Because of all these recurrent fights, the final battle loses a lot of its gravity, a lot of its importance, because you've already watched these heroes fight so many times before. The same is true for your average action movies. Even an action movie I love, John Wick, a lot of these gunfights lose their power because it's constantly showing them. Granted, you're kind of watching those movies more to see the action itself, rather than to feel the gravity behind what the action represents. So violence in films like Sicario feels so much more powerful and can use so much tension because there's less of it, and because we build everything around it. We build the characters and we build the world that everything is happening in. So when we look at pacing, we can start by thinking about two of the most popular directors working today, and that would be David Fincher and Quentin Tarantino. So these two are generally regarded as having consistently great pacing. They use a lot of dialogue, and that serves to really develop their characters. Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, Pulp Fiction all use casual dialogue, which helps maintain interest in the conversation. So I'm sure you can think of these very easily, such as the farmhouse scene or Pulp Fiction when they're talking about nothing really other than the taste of a burger, or they're sitting in a car just shooting the shit. But what's actually happening in these scenes is it's actually building these characters. This is a conversation that we would have in our own lives. This is a conversation that doesn't exist simply to advance the plot, like a lot of movies will often do. On the other hand, Fincher uses elaborate traits of characters which influence the dialogue. So Lisbeth Salander from Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is a very eccentric character in her interactions. She says a lot of things and she acts in a certain way with various mannerisms that make the audience really wonder what's going on with this person, and it makes us inherently care more. It really ultimately has some mystery. And the same goes for the narrator in Fight Club. The whole movie, we're trying to pin this guy down. Steven Spielberg and Christopher Nolan, generally it's easy to see good pacing with them because they do films that are generally held on a huge scale. There's so much happening in these movies. Spielberg uses a lot of establishment shots, especially in some of his older, really highly regarded movies like E.T. and Jurassic Park. The slow establishing scenes create wonder. Nolan does the same, especially noticeable with Interstellar. There's a lot of scenes where they're landing on these planets or going into space, and simply the wonder, without characters even talking, keeps you entertained. So even though nothing's happening in these scenes, you're entertained because you're seeing more of that world. Other films, such as The Dark Knight, move rapidly. Dialogical events are arguably as big as the action. Think about a lot of the speeches the Joker has, or that Bane has in The Dark Knight Rises. These are propelling everything as they happen, so even though it's just speech, it's really driving the story. And then Blade Runner 2049 with Denis Villeneuve uses visuals on establishing shots. These build the world. They keep us interested. There's so many establishing shots in Blade Runner 2049. Nothing is actually happening, but it goes a step farther. It's very artistic in the way it's portrayed. There's heavy color correction. There's very great camera movement. And that goes a long way to keep the viewer really interested in the movie because it's simply beautiful to look at, so much more so than your average film. On the other side, we have movies like Inherent Vice. Many scenes are repeated in these movies to build the nature of Doc's lifestyle. Various repeated scenes occur in bed, wandering around, and smoking. Another film is Silence by Martin Scorsese. So this is a film that's very well acted, very well directed, very compelling, but it's very slow. And we feel how slow it is as we watch it. They show the same scene stepping on Christ's portrait several times. First, they show a bunch of random people fighting up to stepping on it. Then they start to show some of the main characters, Ferrara, and then they show Andrew Garfield, finally. But there's so much buildup each time to each of these scenes. We get it. We got it after the first time. You can progress to the main characters and imply that that's happening. You don't need to repeatedly be showing it, and if you have to, at least minimize some of that buildup. They continue to show a lot of torture and a lot of persecution based upon their religion, but again, these scenes are very constantly used, and there's a lot of buildup to getting to them, and it really hurts the film's pacing. It's very possible that he consciously chose to do that to make the audience feel exhausted, as the characters likely did, but at the end of the day, I don't find it to be the best translation to always put someone into that world. The Master, from Paul Thomas Anderson, similar in style to Silence, in which several trials or exercises occur to build the purpose of characters and the plot. These experiments are very drawn out. The no blinking scene is very powerful, but others, especially the less formal ones, draw on for an incredulous length. And really, what it's doing, it's letting a lot of acting come through, but it's not compelling the audience because we've already seen these so many times. We know what's going on, we know where it's leading to, so what is the value of repeatedly showing these trials? Another great recent film, Darkest Hour, has a huge focus on realism. Several scenes are used to gradually build Churchill's character, but we see the same conflicts repeatedly. We see his arguments with his constituents, we see the disagreements, we see the conditional surrender being brought up time and again. But after the first couple of times, we don't need to see full drawn-out conversations regarding the same subject. And then I thought I would include a film I deeply love, easily in my top 5 films of all time, There Will Be Blood. I can objectively say that the pacing is not perfect. The same "I'm an oil man" pitch is seen multiple times. Even Eli's preaching reoccurs frequently. It continuously happens throughout the movie. So what really sets There Will Be Blood apart, for me, is that some of the dialogue directly leads to the most essential part of the film, such as the infamous milkshake scene. Ultimately, it is a slow film. There are plenty of scenes that build characters, that show acting skill, that are absolutely perfect, but at the end of the day, it is possible that some of these scenes were not terribly necessary to reach the level of character development and the climax that are displayed. Now, these movies are actually very high quality. They appeared in the Oscars, and they're regarded by many as some of the best movies ever made, but objectively, we should be able to recognize that their pacing is very slow, and you do need a certain mood to be able to watch these particular films. So what makes good pacing? In my opinion, a great quality film can be made with slow pacing, but it will lose its appeal the slower it becomes. Longer dialogue leads to deeper characters, but the dialogue must be kept dynamic. It must not only serve to build the character based within the plot. A fewer number of establishing shots and dialogue leads to weaker payoffs, and establishing shots work best when they characterize wonder, whether it is mystery about the character or the world itself. So let me know your thoughts on pacing and on some of the examples that I used. And if you want to break down some other films, leave them in comments and perhaps we will explore those in the future.